everybody. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to Churchcentral South and to a very special day in Churchcentral South. Today, the 5th of September, is a new dawn for us, a new moment where for the first time in 558 days, our church is both legally and logistically able to gather in one venue together in person. We've tried various things, including 6s in homes, 40 of us at the church offices, and a whole range of online stuff over the pandemic to keep us connected, and God's been in that. But today is a moment that we've been waiting for, a chance for us all to be back together. And I know that watching a video of the slight less good substitute online meeting is not the same. And I guess that's something we just want to acknowledge, that watching an online meeting isn't the same. And so this meeting and next week's online meeting and the one after that and all the ones we're going to put out for the next half term or so are no substitute. They are not a replacement. If you wake up one morning and you feel a little bit more tired than usual, it's not like, I'll just not go because I can watch the online one. This is not going to be anything close to a substitute for being together with the church family. Yet, I know that through illness or shift patterns or COVID caution or mental health stuff, or perhaps you're just looking in from outside and you're not quite ready to join us in person yet, I know that these online meetings can still be a bit of a lifeline, a bit of a way of staying connected. So we're going to keep putting them out, stripped back though they will be, but we hope that they at the very least help you feel connected to us, get a little bit of an insight into who we are, and look to God for a few moments in your own home or wherever you're watching from. As for today, we're going to start by singing a brilliant song, a song called Jesus Be the Center. Johnny and Esther recorded this when we were only online and they were leading our worship times online. And it's a brilliant song to use as a prayer for our church at this moment. I am bored to death of talking about logistics and how we're going to gather and all of that. But I'm not bored to death with Jesus. I love Jesus. He's worthy of our praise, our attention, all of our effort, all of our energy, all of the cost that comes with following him. He is more than worth it. And so we want to pray using this song that Jesus would be the center of online, in person, whatever it looks like, it would be about him. Before they sing, I'm going to put some words up on the screen from Colossians 1. Why don't you read these out with me at home to praise Jesus, and then we'll be led in song. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things were created by him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. Let's pray that Jesus will be the center of it all.
Jesus be the center of it all. Jesus be the center of it all. From beginning to the end, always be, it has always been you, Jesus. Jesus, sing that again. Jesus be the center of it all. Jesus be the center about you. Yes, it's all about you. From the heart to the heavens, Jesus be the center. It's all about you. Yes, it's all about you. From the heart to the heavens, Jesus be the center. It's all about you. Yes, it's all about you. From the heart to the heavens, Jesus be the center. It's all about you. Yes, it's all about you.
At this moment in our in-person meeting at King Edwards, we will be using these cards. I don't know if you can see these. They say, God has been good to us, with lots of blue tinted pictures of people. And we're going to be getting everybody in the room to grab one of these, kids included, and to write down on it a little story or a phrase or a memory of how God has been good to them in the pandemic. And I'm just here to say that because you're not there, you're not able to do that, but you are. Because using the email address that is here, you can either right now press pause and think about that and email it in, or you can just at the end of this online meeting send me an email with your story of how God's been good to you. And then we're going to be compiling all these cards and making like a bit of a noise about all that God has done. And so if you want to be involved, even if you're watching from very far away, and you've never met any of us, but you've been watching our online meetings, you'd be really, really welcome to drop me an email with your story. As for now, I'm going to hand over to Jonathan, who's going to speak from the Bible to us.
Well, as we finally, after so long, are able to all meet together again as a church on a Sunday morning, I'm aware there are a whole range of emotions swirling around, from joy and excitement at finally being back together again to very real fear and anxiety, even dread, confusion and pain. And there's probably a similar range of feelings around the church itself. You may be full of faith for all God's going to do among us in the months and years to come, or you may be struggling just to see the purpose of the church right now. Like, I don't even know what the church is. I kind of feel disconnected from it all and really can't see the point anymore. None of which is surprising. Because, let's be honest, many of us have been in survival mode for so long that it's understandable that we'd have forgotten something of the potency and potential of the church at its very best. It's no surprise that we've kind of lost sight of the power of living radically for Jesus together in the world. And so, as we begin opening things up again, I want to use this as a bit of an opportunity to re-examine the foundations of what it means for us as a church together to be radical disciples of Jesus, particularly around the call to love. By way of context, I'm going to read you a brief account of the incredible rise of the early church, followed by some famous words from Jesus in John chapter 13. First of all, here's an extract from a book published by the Barna Group. The growth of the early church is arguably the most remarkable sociological movement in history. The numbers are staggering. In AD 40, there were roughly 1,000 Christians in the Roman Empire, but by AD 350, almost 30 million. A remarkable 53% of the population had converted to the Christian faith. Sociologist Rodney Stark has spent much of his career researching how this explosive growth happened. In The Triumph of Christianity, he writes of Jesus, he was a teacher and miracle worker who spent nearly all of his brief ministry in the tiny and obscure province of Galilee, often preaching to outdoor gatherings. A few listeners took up his invitation to follow him, and a dozen or so became his devoted disciples. But when he was executed by the Romans, his followers probably numbered no more than several hundred. How was it possible for this obscure Jewish sect to become the largest religion in the world? When you see who Jesus chose to found the church, it seems even more implausible. The disciples were untrained men who failed as often as they thrived. Peter kept returning to fishing. James and John wanted to call down fire on the very people Jesus came to save. Thomas doubted. Judas betrayed. They were selfish, contentious, and they abandoned Jesus at his moment of greatest need. Yet, from these humble roots, baptized in the power of Pentecost, the early church grew to become not only the largest, but the most influential community in the Roman Empire. All of this raises significant questions. What on earth could have compelled half an empire to convert? How could a Jewish political rebel crucified on a Roman cross become the saviour of the empire that killed him? The early church leaders didn't have the things that we now consider essential for our faith. They didn't have official church buildings, vision statements, or core values. They had no social media, radio broadcasts, or celebrity pastors. They didn't even have the completed New Testament. Christ followers were often deeply misunderstood, persecuted, and some gave their lives for their faith. Yet they loved, and they served, and they prayed, and they blessed, and slowly, over hundreds of years, they brought the empire to its knees. They did it through love. All of which really is the outworking of Jesus' command to each and every one of his followers in John 13, verses 34 and 35. Jesus says, "So now I'm giving you a new commandment. Love each other. Just as I have loved you, you should love each other. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples." Now look, over the next couple of weeks, just so you know where we're heading, we're going to examine how to live as radical disciples of Jesus, outwards in our love for the world around us, upwards in our love for God. But this morning I want to begin really by focusing inwards and homing in on the way we're to love each other in our church family. You see, I think we've been so impacted by how relationships are in the culture around us that it is a real challenge to view relationships in the church the way Jesus calls us to. It's like the pressure, the pain of the last year has led to this alarming escalation of criticism, judgmentalism, blame, suspicion, anger, negativity, and not just out there in the world. I lost count of the number of stories I've heard just over the last few months of people leaving churches over petty disagreements, churches splitting, even Christian marriages breaking up. And before we bemoan the state of other churches, really, I think it all flows from the unforgiveness and the resentment and the insecurity and harshness that we probably all carry in our hearts, at least some of the time. If we're honest, probably all of us have thought critical thoughts about someone in the church, maybe even today. I want you to listen again to these famous words of Jesus in John 13. I want you to hear them with the challenge and the provocation that I think Jesus intended when he first uttered them. Jesus says, "I'm giving you a new, not suggestion, but commandment. Love each other. Just as I've loved you, you should love each other. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples." Now, it's important to stress that although I think we tend to read the New Testament, don't we, through an individualistic lens, actually it's written to believers together. So whenever you see that word "you" that cropped up in the passage we've just read, it's unlikely to be aimed at you as an individual. Rather, it's you in relationship with others. And when we read our favourite bits of the book of Acts and we see thousands added in a day, and we stumble across accounts like the one we just read of the gospel spreading like wildfire, the tendency could be to pray for the sudden, spectacular work of God to break in, without realising actually it was against a backdrop of believers knotted together in relationship. It's not just a few superheroes like Paul and Peter striding out at the front. It's actually all of these people living together in Christian community, building this web of kingdom relationships across the major cities of the Roman Empire that enabled the movement of Jesus to take traction and slowly but surely subvert the surrounding culture. As Jesus prophesied, it was their love for one another that proved to the world that they were his disciples, and that the gospel was different to and way more powerful than any other message or worldview. Won't you just let it sink in? Jesus is saying that the proof of genuine discipleship, and therefore our effectiveness as a church, isn't how much we quote the Bible. It's not how much we pray, though those things are important. He says the proof is primarily in the way we love one another, and that our love must be marked by the way he has loved us. Let's just pause there for a moment. Let's just reflect on how Jesus has loved us. In fact, let me just spend a few moments reflecting on what his love for us is like. Now, if you manage to think of some things, that's at least part of the way we are to love each other. Now, if we need further help in working out what this looks like in practice, the Apostle Paul spells it out for us in Ephesians 4. Here's what he says: I, a prisoner for serving the Lord, beg you to lead a life worthy of your calling, for you have been called by God. Always be humble and gentle. Be patient with each other, making allowance for each other's faults because of your love. Make every effort to keep yourselves united in the Spirit, binding yourselves together with peace. For there is one body and one Spirit, just as you've been called to one glorious hope for the future. There is one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all, in all, and living through all. Paul couldn't make it any clearer that in the heavenly realms right now we have everything in common. He labours the point, doesn't he, that in Christ we are one. That is the theological reality. We are united. Yet so often our relationships end up looking no different than those in the culture around us, which means that this has got to be a real challenge for us. Doesn't come easy, but we've got to fight for love in our relationships. If you like, we're to actualize in our relationships what we know to be theologically true. Listen, Jesus doesn't call us to be consumers flitting from one church to another. No, he calls us to commit to love one another, come what may. Because at the end of the day, the church isn't defined primarily by the quality of its meetings or its programs or its worship or its preaching or its kids' work or its coffee, but by the quality of its people and their love for one another. Of course, we've all got our different opinions on how things should be done. We'll have our own view on the merits of mask wearing and vaccines and social distancing. We'll have our preferences about music style and length of sermons, and for that matter, meeting in larger groups or smaller groups. And just to help manage your expectations for the months ahead, there are things in the church here that are going to happen and decisions that we made that you won't agree with. People will let you down. You will get hurt. The church will disappoint you at times. But through it all, can we determine to be stubborn in our love and commitment for one another? Because let's be honest, we're not going to get everything right. We're going to make mistakes, just like you're going to make mistakes and not get everything right. But instead of judging and criticizing and walking out, can we lay all that stuff aside and resolve to love one another? Can we, in the words of Paul, make every effort to always be humble and gentle, to be patient with each other, making allowance for each other's faults? Because, quite frankly, we are going to need each other to get through the things that are ahead of us. What's more, the enemy knows that we are most vulnerable when we're isolated and alone. And so he'll be out constantly to drive a wedge between us so that he can pick us off one by one. Please, let's not fall for his schemes. Let's fight for one another and not fight against one another. If we're going to cope with all of the challenges that are undoubtedly waiting just around the corner, we need to press into our relationships, not push people away. And so, to make this really practical, I want to close this out by giving you a bit of depth and definition to what this might look like in practice. Here are 6 quick fire thoughts on the kind of relationships or friendships I think we need to cultivate in the weeks and months to come. First of all, we need friends who will risk for us. In Romans 16, Paul writes this about Priscilla and Aquila. Give my greetings to Priscilla and Aquila, my co-workers in the ministry of Christ Jesus. In fact, they once risked their lives for me. I'm thankful to them, and so are all the Gentile churches. Priscilla and Aquila were this remarkable force of nature. They were this husband and wife team who ran around serving God, strengthening the church. They helped Apollos. They worked alongside Paul, and they were willing to risk their lives. They risked their resources, their reputation, their time, their hearts. I think we could all do with friends like that, couldn't we? The question is, are you willing to be that kind of friend to others? Are you willing to risk for people in the church in the months ahead? And what are you willing to risk? Your time, your money, your energy? What conscious decisions are you going to make to sacrifice for the advance of the cause of Jesus in this next season? Second thing we need is friends who will refresh us. Friends who will risk for us. Secondly, friends who will refresh us. There's this character in the New Testament. Doesn't get a whole lot of airtime, but he was essential to the mission of Jesus. 2 Timothy chapter 1, Paul writes this: May the Lord show special kindness to Onesiphorus and all his family, because he often visited and encouraged, or as some translations put it, refreshed me. He was never ashamed of me because I was in chains. When he came to Rome, he searched everywhere until he found me. May the Lord show him special kindness on the day of Christ's return. And you know very well how helpful he was in Ephesus. At a point where Paul felt abandoned and isolated, this guy Onesiphorus searched everywhere until he found him, so that he could come alongside him and speak life to him. Henri Nouwen says this: when we honestly ask ourselves which person in our lives means the most to us, we often find that it is those who, instead of giving advice, solutions or cures, have chosen rather to share our pain and touch our wounds with a warm and tender hand. The friend who can be silent with us in a moment of despair or confusion, who can stay with us in an hour of grief and bereavement, who can tolerate not knowing, not curing, not healing, and face with us the reality of our powerlessness. That is a friend who cares. And that is what Onesiphorus was like. He refreshed the Apostle Paul's spirit. In the months to come, can we be people who search others out when they're going through a tough time, simply to refresh their spirit? When we see someone who's struggling, let's not rush in with advice, but let's try and figure out how to pour life into them. Let's look to lift one another up whenever we're flagging. Linked with this, thirdly, we need friends who will encourage us. Proverbs 18 speaks of the power of the tongue to bring life and death. We need to speak words that bring life to one another. As Paul instructs us in 1 Thessalonians 5 verse 11, encourage each other and build each other up. I think this is a verse that needs to be underlined, because it's so easy to be critical right now, isn't it? We're a culture of armchair cynics. We sit back and point out the flaws of people doing their best rather than doing our best to encourage them and build them up. Can we all agree? Life is hard. So we could all do, couldn't we, with a bit of encouragement. To quote John Maxwell, encouragement is oxygen for the soul. It takes very little effort to give it, but the return in others is huge. Let me ask you, when you walk into a room, what spirit are you bringing? Are you looking for what God's doing, or are you looking for what's not happening? To put it bluntly, are you bringing oxygen to others, or are you sucking it out from them? Let's be people who always seek to overcome discouragement with encouragement. Fourthly, we need friends who will fight for us. Philippians 2 verse 25 says, meanwhile, I thought I should send Epaphroditus back to you. He's a true brother, co-worker and fellow soldier, and he was your messenger to help me in my need. Epaphroditus was like this soldier willing to fight for others. And really, whenever we're dealing with challenges or obstacles, we need friends like that who will roll in and stand alongside and fight. People who will fight in prayer, like Epaphras in Colossians 4. Paul says of him, Epaphras always prays earnestly for you, asking God to make you strong and perfect, fully confident that you are following the whole will of God. I can assure you that he prays hard for you. You know, sometimes people are so beaten down they don't have the strength to lift up their own hands. Let's be people who contend for them, fighting for them in prayer. Fifthly, nearly done, we need friends who are fiercely loyal. Part of the challenge for us is I think we can unthinkingly, as we've seen already, just drift into relating with one another in the church in the way our culture does. And so we love those who are like us, we love those who agree with us, but as soon as there's a difference, we ghost people out, we blank them, we break the relationship, we move away. It's like our culture knows nothing about loyalty. We break up with our friends, we move whenever we want, we get married and then walk out the moment it gets too hard. We aren't a people trained to keep our commitments with fierce and stubborn loyalty. But thank goodness our call is to Jesus, not the culture around us. Jesus says this in Luke 6, if you only love those who love you, why should you get credit for that? Even sinners love those who love them. We just think for a moment, the times perhaps you have turned your heart away from Jesus, when you've fallen back into sin, and yet Jesus has come and got you. He's refused to let you drift away. His commitment to love you has been fierce, stubborn, unrelenting. And we're called to mirror this in our relationships with one another. Jesus says, you've got to have a different kind of love. We need this fierce commitment to love one another, this stubborn loyalty to one another, even when we disagree and have our differences. And then lastly, we need friends who will tell us the truth. There are plenty of communities out there that will build you up and even flatter you and tell you what you want to hear. There are a lot of other communities that are encouraging and supporting until you disagree with them. But what we're talking about here is a community who are willing to tell you the hard things. Look what it says in the book of Proverbs. Better is open rebuke than hidden love. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy merely multiplies kisses. Now look, I'm not opening the door for a whole torrent of criticism or just getting things off our chest, but we do need people in our lives who will come alongside us in love and speak the truth to us. We all need friends who will help us see our blind spots, speaking the truth in love, whatever it costs. And so, as we draw to a close, as we consider what's going to define us as a church as we move forward, I want to say it's got to be our relationships with one another. God's about knitting us together, but our part in this isn't passive. We're to be willing to risk what we have for one another. We need to be willing to refresh each other's spirits. We've got to look for ways to encourage those who are struggling. We've got to step in and fight for those whose strength is flagging. We have to be fiercely loving, stubbornly loyal to one another. And we need to be willing to tell the truth in love, no matter what it costs. As I look ahead, as I consider the future of our church, I think these are the things that will cause us to stand out. And this is one of the keys to us transforming the people around us. One of the ways people are going to meet Jesus is they're going to get caught up in this network of relationships and end up asking the question, why are you so committed to one another? I mean, it makes no logical sense. Why do you show each other such love? What I'm talking about here is so much more than tolerating one another. No, this is a countercultural love, loving others as Jesus has loved us. And for the record, this is way more than me merely trying to get you to show up here on a Sunday morning. I'm talking about showing up with the right spirit and then working this out through the rest of the week. And the obvious place is in and through our community groups. As many of you have experienced, our community groups have been a real lifeline over the last months. My appeal to you would be, let's not cut it off now that life has got way more busy again. No, this is a time to push in deeper still. And if you haven't yet experienced the joy of being part of one of our community groups, why don't you reach out at hello@churchcentral.org.uk, and we'd love to connect you into one of our communities. In short, I want us to be a church of stubbornly loyal relationships in the months to come, casting a net of people who are refreshed, who fight and risk and love and encourage and tell the truth, pulling others in to encounter Jesus like never before. And when others are added to us, as they will be, I want them to grow up in a healthy culture of love. And so, all that being said, can we please commit together to building a relational robustness in our church that enables us to prosper and thrive no matter what comes in the year ahead? Will we be people who restore broken relationships so that we can love the way Christ has called us to love? And if you have a broken relationship with someone in the church right now, would you take urgent steps to repair it? Perhaps you need to be willing to be humble, make the first move, ask for forgiveness. Maybe you need to forgive somebody. Perhaps they don't know it, but you've pushed them away in your heart. You want nothing to do with them. You're acting in many ways just like the pagan world does. This is a time like never before that calls for a counter-cultural community who are defined by their love for one another. So, Let's resolve to be people who are committed to love each other just as Christ has loved us.
Well, we are nearly done for our short online meeting for today. I just want to flag up 2 ways that you can apply some of what Jonathan has talked about. Firstly, if you're new to us, you're a student or soon-to-be student who's coming to the city and you're having a look at churches, or you're looking in for whatever other reason, I want to encourage you to take the next step of just getting in contact with us. I know this is admin, but it's a means to the end of actually connecting with a real life human being. Scrolling a website can get you the info about us. Watching a video can give you a flavor, but if you can get in touch with us, then we can begin to actually connect you in and speak to you about how we can serve you best. Someone in our office will be really glad to get back to you early in the week. So please, if you're new to us or looking in, get in touch on this email. And the second thing to say is about our community groups. Even in a church that's quite small in the grand scheme of things, we've got about 150 of us or something like that, it can still be quite challenging to feel like we know people deeply within the church. And so I really want to encourage you to join one of our community groups, or if you're not really plugged in, then to throw yourself into those. They're kind of like smaller groups where we most experience family and authentic relationship and community in the church. And so again, just get in touch on the email hello@churchcentral.org.uk and we'll be glad to join you into one of those. Brilliant. I hope to see you soon. I hope that for whatever reason that you've been at home today and not gathering, then I hope that God is with you and that we're able to see you soon. And if not, these services will keep coming online each Sunday to serve you. All the best. Thanks so much. See you soon.
Now you bring me to a higher place.